Hey everyone, and welcome back to Between the Lines. I'm Ian Apetian, and today we've got a great episode in store for you all, as we've got a lot of news to get to, both on the baseball and the soccer front today. But first of all, as you guys can see, I am outside today. It's just a beautiful day in the Bay Area, so I thought I'd just film from outside. So just to let you guys know, there's probably going to be a couple more sounds going on, whether that's behind me or just around here. So the audio levels might be a little different, but it's just a beautiful day out here, so I thought I'd film from outside. But nevertheless, let's just get straight into it. I do want to start off with some baseball, TCU Baseball more specifically. Last week, TCU clinched the Big 12 with a win over Santa Clara Baseball. And TCU ended up finishing the season in the Big 12 conference at 16-8, but with an overall record of 36-20. So it's a really interesting difference between the Big 12 record and the overall record, because as you can tell, in the Big 12 we only lost 8 games, but overall we lost 12 games against teams outside of the Big 12, taking TCU to 20. So TCU Baseball actually ended up losing more games to non-conference teams than they did to conference teams, which is kind of an interesting take this season. But after defeating Santa Clara, TCU moved into the Big 12 Tournament, where all of the seedings would get arranged for the NCAA Tournament. And so for their first game, TCU did actually end up playing Baylor, and they won 4-2, which was great for TCU. That was definitely a huge win, putting them into the winner's bracket. But right after they beat Baylor, things started to go downhill for TCU as they played Oklahoma State and Texas. First, they played Texas, and in this game, there wasn't much to actually separate the two sides, to be honest. It was just that Texas's starting pitcher, Lucas Gordon, had a fantastic day. He's been pretty sharp all season, and he's actually been Texas's number 2. And so I'm not sure if Texas really expected this kind of start from him, but Gordon played very, very well. He went 7 1/3 innings, gave up 2 hits, 2 runs, 1 was earned, and struck out 4 TCU batters. So not a lot of strikeouts, but definitely had the ground balls and the fly balls going for him. And on the TCU side of things, Marcelo Perez pitched a very good game. Obviously, in the first inning, he gave up a 3-run homer to UT. It was on a hanging slider that just crossed the plate a little too much, and then he just took him for the long one. But outside of the first inning, Marcelo Perez pitched extremely well for TCU. He went 7 innings, gave up 5 hits, 3 earned runs, and actually struck out 6 UT batters. So solid outing from Marcelo Perez, but it wasn't enough to get TCU over the hump. And so that actually put TCU into the loser's bracket, where they would go on to face Oklahoma State the next day. And so the next day when they played Oklahoma State, it just wasn't TCU's day. TCU couldn't really get much going on the hitting front. They were down 4-0, worked their way back, then lost the lead again and lost the tie and things like that. Things just didn't really go to plan. But I do want to talk about one really interesting thing that happened during this game, and that was when Kirk Saarloos got thrown out of the game for a very interesting play. So this is kind of in the later innings. Luke Savage, reliever for TCU, came in to try to get TCU out of a jam, and on one of his first pitches against one of the batters, he was called out by the second base umpire for a balk. At the time, there were runners on first and second, so obviously the balk pushed the runners to second and third with 1 out. And so, first of all, the balk, I don't know where the balk was seen from the second base umpire. The second base umpire explained that Savage didn't actually get set before pitching to the batter, but from what I saw, he took a couple steps with his front foot, got set, and then went in for the pitch. But clearly the second base umpire saw something that most people didn't see, so I'm not really sure what he saw there, but he called a balk, advancing the runners to second and third with 1 out. And so with 1 out, Kirk Saarloos came out and Kirk Saarloos came out and signaled to the home plate umpire that he wanted to intentionally walk the batter to set up the double play. Now, the home plate umpire, for some reason, I don't know how, but he took this as an insult. He took it as Kirk Saarloos was getting mad at him or getting frustrated over the balk call, and out of nowhere threw Kirk Saarloos out of the game. which was for a simple signaling, for an intentional walk to set up a double play. A very typical move, smart move by Kirk Saarloos. I don't think Kirk Saarloos was necessarily upset with the call, but he wasn't happy with it. But that for sure, he was not arguing the call there. He was simply just signaling for the intentional walk to set up that double play. But again, the umpire threw Kirk Saarloos out, and this suspension was appealed by TCU. But what was interesting is that NCAA decided that the suspension was going to be a 2-game suspension, which I think is ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous that you have umpires in this NCAA tournament that are this awful. To one, call the balk, and then to think that Coach Kirk Saarloos is getting on the case of the home plate umpire who didn't even make the call, and then to have this suspension be a 2-game suspension for a simple misunderstanding. So I think it's pretty ridiculous what happened. TCU definitely suffered from it. But as of right now, Kirk Saarloos has served the first game, the first of 2 games of the suspension. And that first game came against Oklahoma State on the very next day when TCU took them on. And so yeah, this was it was a terrible call all around. And TCU is going to be playing in the NCAA tournament on Friday, June 3rd, against University of Louisiana Lafayette. And that will be the second game of Coach Saarloos' suspension that he'll serve. After that, should TCU win and advance, then he'll be brought back to the dugout where he can coach his team. But until then, it's going to be played without Coach Saarloos. Moving on now, I do want to change gears a little bit and talk a little bit about some soccer. There's been a few things in soccer that have been going on over the last weekend, and I just want to get to them. First off, the Champions League happened. So the 2022 Champions League that was originally supposed to be played in St. Petersburg, Russia, got moved to Paris, France, because of the Russian invasion in Ukraine and things that Russia's military and government are doing. So that was moved to France, where Liverpool took on Real Madrid in the 2022 Champions League final. Now, it was a really interesting game. I can't say that it was an extremely exciting game because one team was definitely better than the other, and in my opinion, that was Liverpool. But really, if there's a headline to explain what happened, I would choose the title that the better team lost. Obviously, I can say that the better team lost, whenever I want, but at the end of the day, if the better team lost, they lost, and clearly they weren't better. In this case, I thought Liverpool played extremely well. I'm not really sure what Liverpool could have done differently to really take advantage of Real Madrid. They had 24 shots, 9 of which were on target, and they had over 2 expected goals on the stats sheet. And in terms of just all-around play, one thing that I was really interested in looking into coming into the game was how Andy Robertson and Trent Alexander-Arnold, Liverpool's fullbacks, would do and fare against guys like Valverde and Vinicius Jr. Because knowing Alexander-Arnold and Robertson, they're very attacking-minded fullbacks. So they like to get up the field a lot, which, just like how I explained in my last video, when fullbacks get up, there's a lot of space behind them. And that's something that you can't give to guys like Vinicius Jr. or Karim Benzema on Real Madrid. And so one thing that I was really impressed by was the balance that Robertson and Alexander-Arnold showed. They showed great balance. They showed discipline on knowing when to go up and when to drop back. So they definitely contained that Real Madrid counterattack that typically goes through Benzema or Vinicius Jr. So I thought that was really good. And again, Liverpool dominated the game. They dominated early on. I'd say from the first minute through the 30th minute, they dominated the entire game. They held possession. They got shots on goal. They got crosses into the box, corner kicks left and right. And Madrid really couldn't do much. But Madrid slowly grew into the game after that 30th minute, where they started to get the ball a bit more. They figured out how Liverpool played and what they actually needed to do better. And I want to get to that right now and talk about why Madrid seemed like they had such trouble in that first half. And one thing that I noticed right off the bat was that their midfield was very, very conservative when it came to stepping up and going onto the attack. Their midfield obviously was between Modric, Toni Kroos, and Casemiro. And so these are three, I'd say, defensive-minded midfielders. Obviously, I think Casemiro is the most defensive of them of them three, and Modric is probably the most attacking-minded midfielder of them. But all that aside, this Real Madrid midfield three were really conservative in how they went forward and how they joined and supported the attack. Many times when Real Madrid was kind of on the ropes, on their back foot, and they got the ball out, there were huge gaps between that midfield and that attacking front three, which consisted of Valverde, Benzema, and Vinicius Jr. And so one thing, well, I guess two things that this affected was, one, the attack, because then you'd have Benzema, Vinicius Jr., and Valverde up there going up against 4, 5, 6 Liverpool defenders, and they've got no help. And then another thing that this actually affects is how Real Madrid were able to get out of their half and build out from the back. Now, this is something that Real Madrid struggled with early on, and in my opinion, it's because that midfield three was so far back and that they were too close to that defensive line. And when you have a block of 4 and then a block of 3 this close with a gap and then your front three all the way up here, it makes it easy for Liverpool to defend that. The big gaps allow for Liverpool's defensive mids to quickly regain possession if no one's there to help the attackers. And by having that block of 4 and that block of 3, it's easy for Liverpool's attacking mids and attackers to just defend, because if the Real Madrid defenders and midfielders are so close together, it takes less guys to really defend it. So they can easily just shift from left to right and keep Real Madrid from building up. So I think that's why we saw a lot of just kicking it up the field from Courtois or Alaba or Mendy, things like that, because Madrid typically plays a slow game, but they don't play a reckless game or a careless game. Typically Real Madrid is very careful with the ball, just like they were here, but they were a little too careful. They didn't really take any risks in the first 30 minutes. They were a bit cagey. They kind of, just like I said earlier, they were very conservative on the ball, didn't want to get up too far, at least with their midfield, and so that really caused problems for them and pretty much for that entire first half. Second half, it got better as they grew into the game. They started attacking more. Toni Kroos got up the field more. Luka Modric got up the field more, and they kind of left Casemiro to be that main holding midfielder. So that definitely helped Real Madrid balance out in that second half. But the story of the day, though, for this Champions League final was Thibaut Courtois. Perhaps one of the most underrated goalkeepers in the world right now. Thibaut Courtois had a fantastic day. He made so many saves against Liverpool. I guess Liverpool had 9 shots on target, so he had to make at least 9 saves. He was insane. I can't even really point to a place where I think Liverpool could have done better. It was more just the fact that Thibaut Courtois had the game of his life that day and saved Real Madrid's butts left and right. Salah had many shots on goal. There were a few shots from Mane that Courtois had to parry off the post or grab in the air or punch away. But Thibaut Courtois played very, very well, and he actually did win the Man of the Match award for the Champions League final following the trophy ceremony. Again, though, I mean, this was an interesting game because I think everyone kind of came away feeling that Liverpool was the better team and that they deserved to win. And even though they didn't, no one can really point to a reason why or a reason for how Liverpool could have won other than finishing their chances. The thing is, again, Liverpool had a bunch of chances and they took advantage of them. It's just Thibaut Courtois was absolutely ridiculous. And again, I think he's one of the most underrated goalkeepers in the world. Because right now, I feel like, in terms of the Yashin Gold Glove Award. You hear guys like Allison and Ederson and Neuer, but you never hear Thibaut Courtois' name come up. And I can't give enough credit to this guy. He single-handedly saved the day for Real Madrid left and right. So that's my take on the Champions League final. I want you guys to comment below what you guys thought about it, because it was a really interesting game, and I'm curious to hear what you guys thought of Liverpool and maybe what they could have done to win the game. But in my opinion, it was out of their hands. It was just Thibaut Courtois making saves. So we are going to move on now to a game that happened this weekend as well. It was on Sunday, and there was a lot of controversy late on in this game between Huddersfield and Nottingham Forest when they played each other in the EFL Playoff Final to see which team would be the final club to get promoted to the Premier League. Nottingham Forest eventually won 1-0 in this game within the first 90 minutes. Sorry, within the allotted 90 minutes, without going to extra time or pens. They won it 1-0. But late on in this game, I think maybe 5 to 10 minutes apart, there are 2 penalty appeals. And the first one that I want to talk about is a penalty appeal from Jack Colback on Harry Toffolo. So this was late on in the game, and I'm gonna try to get these pictures on the video. So hopefully, if copyrights don't catch these pictures, that would be great. So you guys can actually see them on the screen. But when I look at these pictures, Jack Colback clearly makes contact with the Huddersfield player, and even though you guys are only seeing pictures and not the videos, he actually dives in, doesn't get any of the ball, clips his ankle, and Toffolo goes down. And the thing is, on the field, John Moss didn't call it a penalty. He actually yellow carded Toffolo for simulation, which I thought was kind of interesting. And so, as a result of this, and all of the tension going on, they did go to VAR, and the people in the VAR booth took a look at it and actually awarded it to be the right call. So they didn't call it a penalty, and they upheld the call on the field from John Moss, giving the yellow card to Toffolo for simulation. Now, in my opinion, this is a terrible call. Again, you guys can't see the video, but if you would like to, I would highly recommend looking up just the EFL Playoff Final between Nottingham Forest and Huddersfield and just watching the highlights. You guys will see the video in full. But yeah, Jack Colback goes through Toffolo's right ankle right here, and Toffolo, yes, he drags his foot, but that's after the contact is made, and so he falls down. So again, I'm not sure where John Moss was looking or where the VAR officials were looking, but to me this was a terrible call. But what was interesting is that, sure, okay, they made the wrong call. That's past us now. Now, a few minutes later, there's another big decision that needs to be made. Now, this was a tackle from Max Lowe on O'Brien, who plays for Huddersfield. This was also in the penalty box. And so, again, as you guys can see, hopefully if these pictures can get up, that would be great. If not, I'll just explain it to you guys. But on these pictures, you can see that Max Lowe is going through the leg of O'Brien to get the ball. He doesn't make any contact with the ball. The ball is in Lowe's the ball is in O'Brien's control all the way. And again, you can just clearly see that Max Lowe is going through the offensive player's leg to get the ball. Now, what I was absolutely stunned at was that, first of all, it wasn't called a penalty on the field, and secondly, they didn't even check VAR for this one. Now, this is one of those moments where fans will kind of, sit back and think about it and say, why do we have VAR if they're not going to review it? You very easily could have just said, look, I'll take another look. I don't know if it is or not, if it's a penalty or not, but it's worth another look. Now, that didn't happen. The referee, John Moss, didn't ask for VAR to look into it, which I thought was pretty astonishing. And so the game carried on. But again, this is where, me, along with other soccer fans around the world will ask themselves, why do we have VAR if we're not going to use it, or if it's not going to be used correctly? Because I guarantee you this would have been called a penalty, especially coming off of the last challenge that was called for that was called for simulation. And another thing that's really interesting about this is that this could have been your makeup call for John Moss. John Moss clearly dropped the ball in the first call, and this could have been that call that redeemed him and redeemed the VAR officials if they got this one right. But they really just botched it up completely. And so Nottingham Forest did go on to win the game 1-0 and were promoted back to the Premier League after 23 years of being in the EFL Championship or below. And so credit to Nottingham Forest. I can't say that they deserve to win because, again, we don't know what would have happened had these been both called penalties or had one of them been called a penalty. But you can only wonder. But credit to Nottingham Forest and their manager and their organization as a club as a whole for getting back up to the Premier League, the top flight in England after 23 years out of it. It's just, I can't say anything else but the fact that Huddersfield have to feel hard done by these two missed calls. But you can't really go back anymore. You just have to move forward, and it's going to be interesting to see how VAR changes or doesn't change after these two calls. What's interesting, though, is that John Moss, the referee for this playoff final, that was his last game. And so he's going to become the manager of the English FA VAR group. And so if you have someone on the field that's making these calls, well, I can only imagine how calls are going to get affected going into next year's Premier League season and the years after if this very referee on the field is going to be the manager for the FA VAR booths. So it's going to be really interesting to see what develops. But that is all that I have for you guys today. Thank you so much for tuning into another episode of Between the Lines. Thank you guys for your support. Before you leave, make sure to check us out on Instagram down below. Check me out on Twitter as well, and check me out on TikTok, where I'm posting daily videos and kind of highlights about me talking through certain things going on in sports. Be sure to check us out on those platforms. Make sure to listen to us on Spotify if that's where you want to get your podcast. But until next time, I'll see you guys later.